The Four Horsemen have invited the community to do a post-apocalyptic custom of the Hot Wheels Big Air Bel Air that you see there. Now, as I was looking things up for this, I came across a picture that I really liked some of the features of. So I want to steal some of those ideas into this build. I'm not one when I do post-apocalyptic builds or Gasland style builds to feel that you always need to throw guns on it, that you always need to throw skulls on it. Heck, if you look at like the Mad Max movies, it's not like every damn vehicle had 14 guns strapped to it, or skulls falling off of it. There was a variety of the vehicles, and I like that variety. So I took this apart and I knew I wanted to make some substantial changes to it because honestly, the Big Air Bel Air has a lot going on. First of all, I knew I wanted to change the wheels, and set 3 of the Real Riders had that set in it, and I really liked those wheels. So I thought they'd be good for this build. I do end up painting those to kind of go along with what you saw in that image a few minutes ago or a few seconds ago. I do end up painting them to make them look more like that. But what I really wanted to do was make some substantial changes to the body. I don't want to make it look too clean. So things like the trim, while I do clean some of it off, because the Bel Air was flashy. That was the intent. And so I wanted to get a lot of the like molding that they put on the sides of this, that kind of thing. I wanted to get rid of it, but I didn't want it to look too clean. I wanted to keep some of the residue as if the trim had just been torn off or decayed away. First thing I knew I wanted to do was fill in those holes in the top. And I wanted to put those exhaust stacks coming out of that front. So there you see, I filed the holes that I wanted for the exhaust stacks. And then it was time for me to do, I love doing it. It's time for JB Weld. And when I use JB Weld, I like putting the tape over the areas that I'm going to fill in on the outside and then fill it in from the inside because it gives me a much smoother finish to work with on the outside of the casting. And that's all you're going to see. So logically, using this tape approach, it's something I really find works fantastic for me. You may do it differently, and that more power to you. I don't like having to do all the filing work. I don't like having to do any more filing work than I absolutely have to. I do get rid of the side exhaust, so I needed to fill in those areas there. You saw I filled in the area on the light bar on the roof. I filled in the area from the extra fuel tank in the back. I fill in the supports for the shocks that were in the front just to fill all that in. So yeah, I do a lot of body work on this and kind of take it back to a more plain looking casting. And yeah, it's time to mix up the JB Weld. Yeah, the best part of any build is the JB Weld part of the build. It does take JB Weld some time to set up. So when I mix this stuff up and drop it into these areas, I do have to let it set up overnight before I can work on the casting again. When I filled in those front areas on the hood of the car, I didn't fill them in completely, obviously, because I was keeping those round holes. And again, I wanted those round holes not to fit the exhaust snugly, obviously. The hood's going to have to drop in over those stacks. So it needs to be a loose fit. And you'll see how I approach that later when I actually do the stacks. It may have been a bit much, but I had a lot of fun doing it, so we'll get to that. But there's a JB Weld in, and I let that set up, like I said, overnight, and then pull the tape off, and there you see the result. I love the result. I still end up putting a little Bondo spot putty on it and stuff, but now it's time for me to edit the interior portion so that it fits all those areas I filled in. And so I start cutting things off. I start cutting off the supports for the front shocks. At first I cut just the lights off the light bar. I knew I wanted that to go. Cut the fuel tank off the back. Cut those exhausts off the side. Yeah, I cut a lot off of there. Realized that the light bar, still that roll bar portion was too much. And I cut that out. I do end up replacing that with a top to the roll bar later in the build. But for now, that's out of the way. I also did not like that front grille portion with that light bar on the front. It's just a lot of crap this thing has on it. And I didn't want it. This damn thing's a survivor. A post-apocalyptic survivor. And I knew what I wanted. And a lot of you aren't going to agree with it. But frankly, I don't give a damn. This is my build. You do your build your way, I do my build my way. And I was stripping this damn thing down. There you see those little side portions where the exhaust was originally coming out behind the front fender. Had to fill those in, like I said. And so there you kind of see where I was going. And I wanted to get rid of the trim. And so there you see me filing off some of the trim on the front. And again, I intentionally, while I get it off of there, I don't get it off completely. I wanted to leave some of the roughness. I wanted to leave some of the aging. There you see something you don't see often in my builds, a vise. But again, I was using the pin vise to drill out the front headlights because I want those rotted away. That was like in that original photo. It had the headlights were rotted out of the body. I like that. Here it is after hitting it with the Bondo spot putty. And I am filing away the driver's side tail light assembly. And there's a reason for that. And there you see the vise and the pin vise again. And I'm drilling again. And I'll explain that in a bit. But what I end up doing here, because I want those stacks out the front, I take some styrene, stick it in that notch in the hood. Because what I end up doing, and if you look at the left by my knuckle above the paint, you see that little C-shaped brass. It's a brass rod with two brass tubes slid over it. Not glued in place, just slid over it. Because I'm going to use that rod. I'm gluing that rod down to that styrene that I just added. And again, that solid brass rod with two brass tubes over it, the two brass tubes being the exhaust. Busted out the JB Weld again. You're getting a lot for your money in this video. There you see how I want the exhaust to look. The brass rod is held in place. There you see the two exhausts. And I actually pull those off because they are not solidly attached. I hit the body with white primer. And then I went through a rusting, weathering, junkifying paint job using a series of AK Interactive rust paints. And I just start sponging it on. I use Nuln oil to bring out some of the door seams, trunk seams, some areas, just some different areas. You see I'm bringing out the area behind the back window area where the window would be if there was one. I did not put grates over the windows in this. I really kept this stripped down. And again, I just didn't want it to be slap some guns on it and you're done. You know, I wanted this to be, this is a more involved build for me, and you may or may not like the results. I'm happy with the results. It may not be the post-apocalyptic build that you have in mind, but your apocalypse could be different than my apocalypse. Anyhow, I did put a liquid mask over the ends of that brass rod that's sticking out of the hood, just to make it easier when I go to slide the tubes over it, the exhaust tubes over it. You can see how the Nolan oil helped bring out the seams in the body. And I didn't use it over the entire body again. I just floated into those seams. And now I'm brushing a little more, or sponging, a little more rust on, a little more wear on. And it's a look that I wanted. It's a more orangey rust look. It's a more light rust look to me than a darker, heavier rust. That original photo of that actual car had a darker rust look to it, and I was trying to avoid that in a way. It also had some areas on it that were obviously bondoed, and I didn't want that look. Not that I didn't like the look of that car, and if you did an exact knockoff of that car, I think it would be fantastic. But again, I kind of knew what I was going for on this one. And so I just sponged a whole lot of weathering on here. I like the result I got on the roof, which is kind of a starburst of rust. But yeah, I'm happy with the result. It's interesting because some of the results in person, it looks differently than it does in like the still photos, which is interesting to me. It's like it looks much better in person than it does in some of the stills. And I'm assuming that's because of lighting, but hell if I know. So yeah, I take you through a lot of the sponging here, but I think it gives you a better feel for how much went into this. Yeah, I just kind of kept at it. I would also see areas that I had missed, and I'd see little white spots, and it's like, oh crap. I did pop the Real Rider tires off so that I could shoot those wheels. And I just wanted them to be black. What I ended up doing actually was I didn't even use black paint. I used black primer and then shot them with flat clear just to seal it a little better. I hated those things on the sides of the body. Almost like steps. They obviously weren't exhausts because the exhausts ended in front of that. And so I had to assume that those were steps because the car is jacked up, and I absolutely hated that. So those had to go. I mean, it's an interesting looking casting completed on its own, but when you start editing it, you really want to edit a lot away, or at least I did. It was like I couldn't find reasons to keep some of it. So that had to go. This had to go, and that had to go, and the other had to go. And again, I didn't do a super job like smoothing that out either, because I ended up using the Tamiya weathering powders to just lighten up some areas, give it a little dusty look. Again, it's like I didn't smooth a lot of these things out. It's not like I sat there forever filing these things down. I did throw some of the weathering powder on the wheels too. But it's like the lights on the front bumper. Yeah, I cut those lights off, and I didn't file that crap down at all. Okay, that's a bit of a lie. I very slightly did, but I like the rough look to it. I did want the bumpers to look like really rusted chrome, so I did use the Sharpie marker to put silver down at first. There's the two exhaust tubes. And so I hit those with a combination of white, Army Painter white, and AK Interactive Rust. To make it easier to paint, I threw them on a brass rod. I didn't want to try and find a way to hold those things to paint them. So hit them with white paint, sponged them with white paint, sponged them with some rust. I like the effect. Yeah, there you see the AK Interactive, one of their rust pack colors. I think that's orange. It's an orange rust. And again, just kind of dab that on those. After that dried, I hit that with the flat clear and pulled them off the tube, which was probably the hardest part, was pulling them off the rod. This part actually worked well, where I slid them onto that rod that was JB welded under the hood. And it did have the look of truly tubes just sticking out, the exhaust sticking out of the hood. It didn't look like it was attached to the hood in any way. And that's what I was trying to avoid. I really wanted it to have that separation. I didn't want to try and stick it onto that plastic interior piece, because that just would have been a nightmare. This seemed to be the best approach I could come up with. And again, I'm really happy with these tubes the way they turned out. You may think some of this is like overworked in a way, just made more complicated, and maybe it was. But I had fun doing it. It was interesting doing those. And then once they're in place, I did just tap the bottom of the rod where the tubes go in with some super glue. And that way they won't come off the rod. And you don't see them attached to the rod. Then this part, the reason I drilled out that back, I filed off the back tail light and then drilled the hole, was because, they lost the gas cap. And so ended up shoving a blue rag in there in place of the gas cap. That little darn thing was touchy to do, surprisingly touchy. I used matte varnish to hold it in place, in case you're curious. And then I just sanded down the rubber wheels to give them some weathering. I did also end up using some Tamiya weathering powder on these as well. There's the brass tube I put in for the top of the roll bar, since I had cut that out above that area. Put the roll bar in place because it also keeps that body in shape, because it flexes without it, where the top area above the wheels go. So that's it. That's the end of construction. You can see I painted the interior flat black. I hit it with weathering powder. I hit everything in sight on that base with weathering powder. Sealed it all with flat clear. And then it's just time to put it all together. I'd like to thank, at this point, the Four Horsemen for hosting this build. It was fun chopping up the Big Air Bel Air and making it into something I liked. Sorry if you were looking for guns. Guns or skulls. Yeah, you're not going to find one on this. You're not going to find either of them on this. You can see I did rust the chrome on the front and back bumpers. And again, starting with the silver Sharpie helped deaden that, as opposed to like starting with Molotow chrome and then trying to weather that down. I figured starting with the Sharpie was the way to go. And I think it achieves the effect that I was looking for. Get this sucker put together, throw some screws in it, call it a wrap. Be sure and check out all of the other people doing the Four Horsemen build as well. I'm anxious to see what the interpretations are of the Big Air, Bel Air in a post-apocalyptic world. I'm hoping there's a wild variety of things that are going to show up. So everybody, thanks for watching these videos. I've got some glamour shots coming up here in a second. You'll see the before and after on the turntable. Yes, it's a roller. Rolls like a champ. So again, thanks for watching these videos. Everybody, stay safe and healthy out there. And I'll catch you in the next one.